Thank you for the opportunity to speak to the board. My name is Dick Stagnoni, and I've worked on Sprague Avenue for 50 years. I've been out of touch with the local issues for the last 20 years or so, but in the past I've served in the finance committee and the school committee. But two issues which have long been of interest to me are reaching critical point in the process: school regionalization and school construction. I've attended the last two permanent school building committee meetings and reviewed much of the material produced by the permanent school building committee and the Mars group. I've been very impressed with the material produced and the plans that they've developed. But my concern is the current plan to hold simultaneous votes on regionalization in the new school construction. I've long been a supporter of school regionalization of Holbrook Public Schools. For me, this is a critical step to the future of the education in Holbrook. The proposal to join with Avon appears to be an excellent fit and one that I think would benefit the students as well as the taxpayers of the town. So for me, for my vote for new school construction is linked to the passage of the school regionalization proposal. Unfortunately, the proposed simultaneous vote would not permit me to know the town's position on regionalization prior to the school construction vote. Under those circumstances, I feel I would have to vote against the school construction proposal if the votes are held simultaneously, something I really am not anxious to do. I encourage this board to support the regionalization proposal and the severing of the two votes. I've established a Facebook group called Best for Holbrook. BEST stands for B for Students and Taxpayers. There I'm trying to post the core information from the reports for easier consumption, and it is open to all. I appreciate your time and consideration.
Thank you. I think a lot of people share the same concerns. I know at our last meeting, we had a pretty detailed discussion about the regionalization issue and how it pairs up with how the timelines work in terms of the building project and the regional study and moving forward with that. One of the items on our agenda is to establish a town meeting date in, looks like February, where we're going to vote on forming a regional study committee, which is the first step. And we're hoping that the town of Avon will follow suit, because we really need them in order to turn this into a reality. So, anything from anybody else?
Mr. Chairman, I did want to say, just in relation to Mr. Stagnon's comments, I was paid a visit by another resident today who expressed almost identically what Mr. Stagnon said, and he had in his hands a copy of the Holbrook Sun article edition that actually had a picture on the front page of a ceiling with people looking up at the ceiling with all the tiles missing. And his comments essentially were, why would there be a ceiling with all tiles missing? The implication being that, this school is falling down and we need to build it as quickly as possible. And he understands that to have a ceiling such as this, which is just lowered and looks fine, doesn't take a whole lot of maintenance. And I know, and I hope that as we move forward, many people understand the need for new facilities, but sensationalized issues that show something that have nothing to do with the issue, but are purported to say, hurry up, hurry up, hurry up, when maybe the best approach would be to slow down a little so you get to where you're going quicker. is the right one, isn't really the right way to go. And educating the public about the need for a new facility, although is important, equally important is what Mr. Stagnoni is doing in terms of educating the public about the need for a better school system and how regional school with Avon, according to this well-done study by the Mars Group, indicates that the benefits to the educational system will be clearly apparent with a regional school that's built. And I think that that's important. And I consider myself an advocate for a new school building, strong advocate for a new school building. And I consider myself a strong advocate for regionalization. And I think, I don't want to speak for Mr. Stagnone, but I think that's what I heard him state. And I've said it before, and I take an opportunity at any public forum that I have the opportunity to address the residents of Holbrook to express this, because I think it's so important for the future of Holbrook that the likelihood of one portion of that advocacy, a new school building being built, without it being a regional school, is not as good. The likelihood of having a regional school district without first connecting it with the new school building as part of the process reduces the chances for a regional school district. Ironically, both together, working together as a whole community, has the best chance of being successful for both the new school building and a better educational system, and at what cost? None of us have a crystal ball. We don't know what the voters will do if presented with an opportunity to vote to fund a K-12 school that's not regional. It may well pass. But the likelihood of it passing, I would have to think, would be diminished, at least by one vote, two votes from, that I've heard already today. And why? Because the process of determining whether you're gonna have a regional school may take 6 months longer than proposing a vote for a K-12 school, not knowing whether it's gonna ultimately be regional or not. Hurrying up to get that vote for funding for a school that could become regional in the future may well delay that school building project for years, because it may not pass. Holding off for 6 months, in my opinion, and we don't have a crystal ball, is the quickest way to get a school building built. But more importantly, it's what type of education is going to be provided within that building that is just most important. And likewise, I really believe that the chances of a regional school agreement and a regional school being district being had with Avon are significantly increased if that is tied to the school building project. Because most towns that regionalize their school districts, they do it in conjunction with a school building project. And that is kind of the impetus of getting it done. It clinches the deal, so to speak. And so I've stated it again, and I appreciate the indulgence of the board.
Well, as I've said before, first steps first. We need to form the regional study committees in both
Right.
towns. That is the absolute first step. And once we do that, I think we're off and running in the right direction.
And I was happy to hear that the school committee voted to support
The
an article at town meeting to form that committee. And I'm hopeful that not only at our town meeting, but at a subsequent Avon town meeting, we show the town of Avon our desire to move forward cooperatively with a regionalization planning committee, because we know what happened 2 years ago when that town meeting was had, and it was defeated very narrowly by about 6 votes. And, what happened behind the scene in terms of the logic behind that vote of Avon's town meeting.
All right. Well, I appreciate your bringing it up. Do you want to repeat your Facebook page again?
Oh, yeah, it's Best for Holbrook is the name of the Facebook group. And again, that's B for students and taxpayers. It's the theme. And, I am a little concerned that the way the process is being driven by the permanent school building committee and right now with this simultaneous vote, is there gonna be enough time to change that schedule? Are we gonna be providing information to the school building administration that talks about a parallel vote and then have to go back to them and change our story later on? That's why I'm trying to bring it up early, because if we want to adjust the schedule, then, I don't know when the right time is. Obviously, everybody who's more involved than I am knows best, but if we are gonna change the schedule, what is the best, what's the latest point in the process where we can do that without being very disruptive? I mean, what Mr. Phelan was saying is part of my concern is that if the school, there's a lot of work that's gone into putting this plan together. And the last thing I'd hate to see is that it get defeated. And I think that and I agree that, I think that with regionalization in place before the vote for the school construction costs, we have a greater chance of success in the vote, in the override vote. And unfortunately, I think that regionalization is a very important piece of this. I think the report outlines numerous educational benefits. It's not just financial story, it's an educational story as well, and a very compelling one, I think. And the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston put out a report about, how regionalization not being, not just on schools, but on a lot of services. In Massachusetts, it's so common for every town to have one of everything, right? But it's like a 20% overhead for towns in the state of Massachusetts because of the lack of regionalization of services. And clearly, with the school department being about 50% of our budget, I think, right? Regionalization can be a big chunk of that 20% opportunity. And obviously the biggest one, I think, of all the opportunities we have.
I agree, and actually the permanent school building committee meeting next Wednesday night, we're going to have representatives there from DESE and the MSBA. And I suspect that this will be discussed there to a certain degree.
To a certain degree, but, I know the MSBA, at a conference call that we had, we brought this up, basically told, us at the conference call, hey, don't come to us until you form your committee. If you have a committee formed, then we're willing to talk to you. And my concern is, I don't, maybe it's the lawyer in me, never ask a question you don't know the answer to, or until you're ready to ask it. And that's one of my concerns about the, next week's meeting. We don't have the regional planning committee formed. We're asking a hypothetical. The agency deals with reality, and my concern is this response is gonna be, hey, you have a school building project in front of us now. Do you want us to go forward with this, or you don't? And will it delay? Yeah, it might delay us. And then the hysteria that forms afterwards, that takes away the opportunity to go to them when you have a regionalization planning committee in place, you have your state delegation there, you have a specific request that you're making, and then you ask them. I prefer the latter than the former, because I always get worried about reading into things. I've gone through it in Quincy and MSBA. Everybody likes to read into what will they do, how are they gonna do it. They deal with reality. They don't wanna deal with hypotheticals. They wanna know what's gonna happen. What do you want? Not, what happens if this happens? What happens if that happens? My sense is, they're gonna say, hey, you have a project in front of us. Do you want us to move forward with it or not? You don't have a regionalization project because you don't have a regionalization agreement. If you have a planning committee done, that's a different story, let's talk. But, until you do, just like they said last time, we're moving forward with the project.
Well,
Maybe that's the way it has to go, but I hope not.
I think the reason why they're coming in next week is to answer some of the questions. Is if we do go into a delay the proposed model recommendation from the committee, they go to is it a delay or is it a derailment? What does a delay mean? What does a derailment mean? Does derailment mean that you go to the back of the line and it becomes a 7-year project again? That's what everyone needs to consider.
Well, I think that
And we don't know the
the
answers. and
permanent school
we should ask
building
the
committee,
questions.
the purpose of the meeting, and I was, at the permanent school building committee, was to invite the DESE and Christine Lynch, who's in charge of regionalization, to our meeting, to educate us even further on the issue of regionalization. And then, as an aside, people said, well, we should probably just invite the MSBA there as well. The purpose wasn't to ask the MSBA anything. The purpose was to seek input from Department of Elementary and Secondary Education and the guru, Christine Lynch, who's in charge of regionalization, on counseling us on what her thoughts were on how to proceed properly with the MSBA. So, having the MSBA there, I wouldn't have suggested inviting them. I don't think it adds any value. I think it could take away from everything, because they're the arm that everybody's trying to figure out what they're gonna do when we're not sure yet, and we wanna be able to, when we go to them, know exactly what we wanna ask and what we want from them. And, if we're asking them, if we do this, if we do that,
I think it's less, I think it's
Absolutely.
less hypothetical as you're making it out to be, because we'll have a vote tonight to place a regional study committee vote on the warrant. Avon is doing the same, so there's movement going in that direction. So it's much more based in reality than
Yeah.
3 years ago or 4 years ago, saying, what if? We have a partner. We have a partner who's serious about putting something on a town meeting warrant, as we are. And there are questions that need to be answered. And, I can't believe that the questions or the position that we're in today as a town of Holbrook is different than any other town that's going through this. People have questions. Why? Because they don't regionalize or build schools that cost $70 million every day. And so there are a ton of questions that are out there, and I'm glad that they're available to be able to answer questions and put people's minds at ease, or remove some of the untruths or half-truths to say, this is what you need to do. And I know when you speak to the MSBA, they're not gonna tell you necessarily exactly what's on their mind, because they hold their cards very close to their vest. But at least we have an opportunity to converse with them and then see what the alternatives are. And, I welcome that opportunity, so that people can make an informed decision.
Well, and I know you are absolutely accurate with your statements, Matt, and I appreciate your leadership in the whole process. I really do. I think you're a clear thinker. I think you see the big picture, and I appreciate that. But we had a letter from the MSBA and the DESE over 2 years ago telling us what to do. And they told us, do a study on the educational impacts of regionalizing. And we refused to do it for 2 years. So we ignored what they told us to do, and then we moved forward with a school building project that had nothing to do with regionalization, and now we're coming back to them saying, whoa, we're thinking about doing the regionalization. So I'd rather, I understand,
No, I mean,
but,
if you look at the schematics, of the 50 parts that have to happen, and you saw that
Yeah.
flow chart, I mean, it was, regionalization was exactly where it is, and we're at the door of that, to do, on the list of the 50 things that need to be done. I don't think we're necessarily taking it out of turn.
oh, we definitely taken it out of turn. We were supposed to have done that before we went forward with the project. We
Well,
was,
the project, I mean, if you look at it, I mean, regionalization was probably 1/5 of the way into the process.
what process are you referring to?
If you look at the flow chart for what needs to happen and the timing.
Whose flow chart?
MSBA. They have a flow chart of all the different things that need to happen, and we've seen it from Joel. But like hiring a project manager, all those different things are to-dos on that list. Regionalization is on that list, and we were tackling it now at the time. At least in my recollection, I haven't seen
Yeah,
that flow
no.
chart in a while.
Yeah, no, that's not from the MSBA. The MSBA normally would expect to know when you began a project, whether it was gonna be a regional school or not. And we, outside the process of the MSBA, because we hadn't done the study when they had asked us to do it, before we started with the feasibility component, my understanding, I kept on harping for 2.5 years, do the regionalization study, find out what the educational impacts were. Joe Byetta, superintendent of Holbrook Public Schools, kept on saying, no, 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 we do that in the feasibility stage, knowing darn well that it wasn't gonna happen then. And when we hired Joel to come in as the project manager, and we said, okay, now we do the regionalization study, right? And it's part of the feasibility plan, right? I knew it wasn't, because I was saying, no, 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 all along, you're not right, it's not part of the feasibility study. Joel, the project manager, announced, no, that's not part of the feasibility study, because if it were, we would have been able to use the feasibility study money to pay for the regionalization study, but we couldn't. We had to go to town meeting and ask for an appropriation.
And the only
For the
reason why
regionalization
that
study.
study was done is because this board put that K-8 option on as an option. And because of that, there had to be a solution for the 9-12. So that's where the regionalization study came out of.
So really, and not to look back, but only to look back so that we move forward now in the best way possible. And when do you stop and say, listen, we want this to be a regional school? We want it to be a regional school. And if it's not gonna be, as Mr. Stagnone, I think appropriately said, I want, when I vote to pay taxes for the next 20 to 30 years at a considerable clip, I want to know what I'm voting for. You're telling me I got to vote to increase my taxes by X amount of dollars for the next however many years, over and above Proposition 2.5, for a school that 6 months from now you will know whether it's going to be regional or not? To me, it really defies logic. It really defies
Well,
logic.
it gets back to what I said earlier. First steps is to form the regional study committee, because until we do that, that question might be answered a lot sooner, if the
If you're
regional.
starting that,
Well,
yes,
but the
it-
concern, I'm sorry. Rick.
No, you're throwing it out the window by putting the other before the regionalization. By voting on something without regionalization, you're throwing the fact that you got this, the first thing you've done, you got it, but you haven't got the answer. So you shouldn't be voting on it until you have the answer in the regionalization.
And,
Well, what, define an answer on regionalization, forming the study committees?
No, they have to, you have to have it agreeable to Avon and Holbrook, and then you're voting on a regionalization.
right, but see, here's the problem that I see with that. And one is dependent upon the other. So, Tim, I agree with you. Hey, we don't even know, we haven't voted for it yet, right? But I didn't get into the specifics of what happened in Avon 2 years ago at their town meeting, when the town voted down the article that would have formed a regionalization planning committee. And the reasoning behind many of the votes that voted against it. And we had a meeting here one night, we invited the Avon Selectmen, and a lot of the same people from Avon that were in that town meeting voting against regionalization were present in the audience. And you spoke with some of them. And they told you, well, we voted against forming a regionalization planning committee because we were told, not specifically by who, that if we voted to form such a committee, we would be delaying, this is 2 years ago, mind you, the committee could have met and done their work by now. The formation of that committee would delay your school building project. So, here we are 2 years later, and we're going to Avon. And if folks in Holbrook that are diehard advocates for the school building project, but not convinced about the regionalization, and I respect their opinion on it, I disagree, try to undermine Avon town meeting again by saying, listen, you're gonna delay our school building project if you say we wanna form a regionalization planning committee, and then it gets voted down again. What happens?
I don't know, but I don't have much control over that.
Well, the control is basically the school building project. No, you're not gonna delay it. It's not gonna happen. Unless it's a regional school, it's not gonna happen, if that's your opinion, but it may not be, you know? And I think that's a legitimate position to have.
The only thing that's gonna delay building a new school is voting to build a new school before you find out whether you're gonna be regionalized. Because if anyone knows anything about the Holbrook voters, there's no way they're gonna vote to continue the status quo.
Well,
It's not gonna happen, you know? And I think it would be wonderful to be part of having a new building and everybody being happy. And I think you'd excite people rather than everybody being down against the schools. I think it's sad to go up to the schools, you see wonderful kids up there. And when you had the meeting and asked what they wanted and all the things they named that we don't have and you can
Had
have.
nothing
Had
to do
nothing
with the
to do
building.
with the new building.
Nothing to do with the building.
No.
No, that was telling. I know. But again, we got 2 articles, one in each town, to form a regional study committee. And I think our energy should focus on making sure those 2 articles pass before we can do much of anything else.